Everybody, today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the scarcity of Bitcoin. We're going to talk about land grabs, and we're going to talk about why you need a little bit more Bitcoin. Also, we have a reader/listener question coming at you now. Bye.
Few 100,000, a couple hundred. So this girl has a few 100,000 on Twitter and a few 100,000 on YouTube.
Yeah.
And she posted this thing about Elizabeth Warren, some commemorating a flag or something like that for Satoshi, right? Nakamoto.
Yeah.
And it went nuts. Twitter went nuts, right? It's all over the place.
Right.
And I had been talking to her and her team for a while, just because we wanted to see if we can connect with them. And offline, I said, hey, this has got to be fake news.
Yeah.
Like, literally. And it was like 12:30 in the morning, I sent this message. I said, it's got to be fake news. There's no way Elizabeth Warren is going to be like all in on Bitcoin. Absolutely not, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, literally last week she was probably saying Bitcoin is the worst. It's used for money laundering. I mean, she was probably in some, government meeting talking about that. Right.
Yeah,
and it should be banned. And
it'd be like Peter Schiff being like, actually, I'm all in on Bitcoin. Who's like the gold bug standard, hates Bitcoin, has for 10 years, and then Peter Schiff would be like, oh, actually, I'm going to buy it all. That would be kind of a similar deal as Elizabeth Warren.
That's right.
Like, oh, this is great. Let's do it. Yeah, you're right. It's funny.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was hysterical. And then sure enough, I looked today. First, I thought it was fake news. Yeah. Then more than likely, it looks like maybe like she didn't even know. Maybe somebody on her team did it.
Yeah.
And more than likely, she is probably... Who's this Satoshi guy? Yeah, sure. Why not? That's probably what it is, right? Anyway, so I thought that was hysterical.
Yeah, super funny.
How are you doing, buddy? Good?
Good.
Super excited for today's episode.
I'm excited too. Today I want to talk, I don't know if you have an agenda, but I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about the halving because it's coming. And I want to talk just a little bit more about the ETFs. And some people are like, oh, that's all we talk about, ETFs. But I think we're in a year of accumulation like has never been seen before. And it reminds me of like in the US back a couple hundred years ago, they would have something called a land grab. Are you familiar with this?
No, tell me.
Okay, so in theory,
I'm first generation immigrant, so I don't know land grabs.
So if you look back in the history of the U.S., specifically, I can think of the instance of Oklahoma. Like they opened up Oklahoma to be like, hey, you can. This is a couple hundred years ago, but when Oklahoma was being settled, they had what was called a land grab. And if you're like a local Oklahoman, and I'm messing this up, this is just like big picture, my thoughts. But I read this book, and in this, they literally like lined everybody up and said, okay, you can go mark out as much territory as you want, and it's yours. And they literally like fired a gun, and people rushed out and literally just marked out what they were going to take, because then they would have to farm it. And they did what was called homesteading. Even my grandfather, who came from Norway, went out to Montana, and the government said, hey, if you homestead this, like if you develop the land, we're just going to give it to you. You just have to work on it for a number of years, and then it's yours. And so I feel like we are in a land grab for Bitcoin right now. And we've never had this asset that is finite like there's only a certain amount of it. And I mean, we've talked about this numerous times, but even as like a Bitcoin veteran, been interested in the space since 17, started buying in 20. I like, it's just hitting me that there's just not enough. There is not enough Bitcoin to go around. And right now, it's literally a land grab. And it's been this way before, but now that the institutions are here, now that your ETFs are grabbing it, it's just so obvious that there is just not enough. And it's going quick. It's going quicker than I think anybody realizes or thought it would go. And I want to show a few things, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that's a really interesting point that you're making right now, because I think it was several weeks ago I had mentioned that I saw Michael Saylor video, and he talked about missing the boat on this or missing the opportunity.
Sure.
However, he used the example of buying a block in New York City, like buying property.
Right.
And it was a really, really great example. And I somewhere we need to share that link, because it was a wonderful example that you haven't missed the opportunity, because if you missed it, say you didn't do it in 1900, but you bought it in 1950 or 1970, right, it still would have been a great, brilliant, right, opportunity. Right. And today, as I'm watching the Bitcoin being bought with the Bitcoin ETF, and you're seeing BlackRock and all of the Fidelity, and you're seeing the accumulation of Bitcoin by larger institutions who can go, and even obviously MicroStrategy, but you're starting to see this large amount of acquisition that's happening, and it's starting to pool, right, in the hands of a few of the larger holders. And then there are those who are smaller ones, and I'm a smaller one, and you're bigger than I am, but you're still, you've accumulated more.
Yeah.
But there are those of us who are we're in this space where we're thinking, every chance I get, I'm gonna, a little bit at a time, buy more.
Sure.
We're not speculating. We're not trading. There are those who are saying, I'm just going to keep buying a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah.
When I think about what you just said, when I think about what Michael Saylor how he had communicated, and in my mind, I start thinking about like this concept of land grab.
Yeah.
Every time I'm buying more and more Bitcoin, the amount of property, right? If I just wanted to think of it from that perspective, I'm buying more and more property.
Right.
And maybe I started with an acre.
Yeah.
But every so often I'm buying maybe a tenth of an acre that's attached to my property. Yeah. Right. Or, a quarter of an acre and attaching it to my property.
Yeah.
Because one thing that we do know when we think of land is finite.
Right.
There is a finite number. All of the countries of the world, there are very few islands that are left that have not been discovered.
Right.
There's, the United States is not growing larger and adding more property.
Yeah.
Right. We have a finite amount of property. And so therefore, as you said, there's a finite number of Bitcoin, and that little bit that we get an opportunity to purchase, we keep buying, holding.
Yeah.
And then there's this value proposition that's further ahead.
Yeah.
All right. So, I think it's really just a really interesting way to think about it.
That's so good. I want to share a few tweets. It's kind of just been hitting me this week, realizing some of these things. Because Bitcoin is the first finite really currency or anything that, besides land, like land is literally the best, property is the best example of what Bitcoin is. My father-in-law is a farmer. rancher, and he always says they are not making more of this as we'd be out on his hundreds of acres in Montana. And it's true. Like, the only way that he can lose that is if he sells it. And then if he sells it, he can buy it back, but he has to offer what the other person wants. And in the same way, they are not making more Bitcoin. We can sell it and be really excited with whatever amount of fiat you get. And maybe at some point I'll be like, okay, it's hit enough to where like, I'm going to trade it for whatever I need. But at the same time, the FOMO would be really, really, let's say it does hit $100,000 and you're like, okay, 100 is enough for me. And you trade it out. But then it, like, in a week, what if it hits 120 and you're like, and then it's like 150 and you're like, and then in 10 years, it's $1 million. And you could be like, yeah, I gave it up for $75,000 and I bought a decent car. That sucks. And I'm not saying to never do that, because like I could use, like, even right now, I need a second car to get around. And I think if we look at Bitcoin as really savings that you can use to probably not just buy like a Lamborghini and hang out, although that would be cool. But if you need it, like if we can go from, hey, this is literally like my emergency fund that I tap into when all else fails. And it's awesome that you have that, because not a lot of people have that, but not just trading it in for fiat to just sit in your bank account. Because even if it hits $100,000, which I would be really surprised it doesn't this year, if I trade that out, like, am I just going to have $100,000 in my savings account and be like, awesome? No.
Yeah. I even then, I think the way in time, my thinking has changed, right? Initially, it was all about, I saw Bitcoin as cryptocurrency initially, and it was about trading it and buying and selling it, and and trying to figure out how to make money that way. And then as I became more educated, paid attention, understood the technology, I've looked at it more as an asset, against which in the future, someday, if it's $1 million, I mean, I would love that to happen. Sure. But then I look at that as an asset that I could potentially borrow against to buy more assets.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's my thinking, and what the longer term strategy for me is. How can I leverage this as an asset that I can use to grow wealth?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think you're exactly
in that direction.
You're exactly right. And I'm not saying to never sell, because like I said, maybe it's an emergency fund, or maybe it hits a spot where you're like, hey, I could trade this for a home somewhere where I want to live at some point. I'm from Montana. My wife and I are both from Montana, and someday we would love a house in a certain part of Montana. And actually, I just got an email, because I like to look at Zillow once in a while, and then they send you emails like, hey, this place is et cetera, et cetera. And it's like in the area that someday I want a house. And I mean, this just kind of goes to show you where inflation and fiat has gone. But this house they sent to me was $500,000. And I was like, in the area I want to live, I'm like, oh, what kind of shack is that? And it's not even like where the rich of the rich live. It's just, that's how much like a starter house in Montana costs these days, $500,000. And that's sad, because 5 years ago, that same property was like $200,000. And even then it was like, wow, that's not great. But it just goes to show, like, properties are not getting better. They're just losing that value with fiat. Like, it just keeps going up and up and up. And right. I want to show just a few things that I've been looking at here.
Sure.
See if I can pull this up. There we go. Share. All right, so there's a few things that have triggered this, and it's just kind of the inflow of the ETFs. And I want to hit here if you check. This is actually a tweet from Mark Yusko, who's a really sharp dude in the space, investor for decades, and got into Bitcoin probably about 10 years ago. But he says this: the greatest wealth is created by being an early investor in innovation. Making that investment requires believing in something before the majority of people understand it. You will be mocked, ridiculed, and criticized for your non-consensus action. It is absolutely worth it. And Mark Yusko said this in 2018, and it's totally true. Back then,
I wish I read this earlier.
But if you think about it, like, I can't tell you how many people have told me Bitcoin's a scam. They have different thoughts on it, et cetera, et cetera. But the tide has turned, especially when I first was interested in 17. It was like, oh, yeah, that's never going to make it. Governments are going to shut it down, all the FUD you can think of. But he is exactly right. If you think about any innovation, whether it was in the internet, what have you, the greatest wealth innovation is created by being an early investor. And sometimes it doesn't probably feel like you're early now, but if you have the capacity to even get part of a Bitcoin, you're early, because we are going to look back on this year, as I said at the beginning, as the year of accumulation, because all of these major firms are grabbing all the Bitcoin. And I'll show you.
Right.
This is Anthony Pompliano.
Really quick. Can I
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just
Please.
comment to this? Right.
Anytime.
So, amazing tweet that you shared there. I had this conversation, and that was 2018.
Yeah.
It's still happening today. There is
Yeah.
not enough education and understanding, and there are a lot of question marks out there. I shared with a family member, and I messaged them, and I said, hey, this is a really great time for you to purchase Bitcoin.
Right.
I think that, and I was trying to encourage them not to miss this opportunity. And the reply I got back, and I won't share who this was in my family, but the reply was, maybe the reply was, thanks for the tip, Lenny. I have retirement in the not too distant future, so Bitcoins are not on my list of investments.
Right.
And that obviously is coming from a place of, one, not having the knowledge, and two, having heard that, again, maybe Elizabeth Warren is in their ears saying, hey, it's a scam, right? And my immediate response was, it should be. It should be part of your retirement plan and your investment plan. It really should be. And I'm hoping that when I came back with that, I even suggested, consider putting some of your retirement funds into one of the Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah.
BlackRock is there. If Fidelity is managing your retirement, right, move some of it, even a portion of it, move 10% into it, whatever it might be, but take advantage of it. And so this is in 2018 and 2024 now. We still have people who are thinking this way. They are not, potentially, they're going to miss out on that land grab opportunity you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
The next tweet is from Anthony Pompliano. He gives just really simple ways to think about Bitcoin. And if you're interested in just learning more, Pomp is a great dude to learn from on YouTube or Twitter, X, what have you. And he says a couple of tweets I want to hit on here. He says, one of the biggest takeaways from studying the best investors in history is that they all figured out something new. They found a new market, created a new investment strategy, or innovated in the structure they used. The outsized returns were in the edge they created. So really, if you think, we are in this new space and people aren't getting rich because they're buying Coca-Cola stock, although like Warren Buffett's famous for having Coke stock, right? But because he was retaining wealth, he wasn't exactly like, I'm going to hit this. But the way Pomp says, finding a new edge, we are on the cutting edge of what is new in the financial space, in the tech space, it is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few of these other ones that are blue chip stocks, for lack of a better term. And if you can get in now, I just don't think it's going to be here. This opportunity right now is not going to be here in a year or 2 years. Like,
right.
literally every hour counts that you are not in, because we weigh this time. Like, crypto time is different than traditional time. If you're not moving in the next day or two, you might miss the boat.
Right. It's true.
Yeah.
And I think that I think what differentiates Bitcoin from other crypto is other crypto is freely traded, and in my opinion, is not going to come to a place where you see a potential stop or a lack in, right, or scarcity.
Yeah.
I just don't see that happening. Ethereum, because of its nature and why its purpose, use cases, it's meant to be transitory. It is going to be used for payments. It's going to be used for smart contracts. It's going to be used for, and as people are looking at different cryptocurrencies and that they're developing it and their use cases, and as you're talking about tokenizing and just all these different things that are happening, Bitcoin is the only one that you can look at and say, there's going to be a point where scarcity is going to be an issue.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the challenge.
Oh my goodness. So with that said, like Pomp says this, BlackRock has raised $5 billion in their spot Bitcoin ETF in less than 5 weeks. For context, 80% of Bitcoin in circulation hasn't moved in the last 6 months. So BlackRock has sucked up 2.5% of all tradable Bitcoin in 5 weeks. And as you're talking about this, he also says there was $631 million, and this is from February 14th, so 2 days ago. $631 million of net inflows to the spot Bitcoin ETFs yesterday. That's 14 times more demand than the network produced in the same day. I don't think people understand the magnitude of what is happening right now. And exactly what you're saying, that's what I've been thinking about. There is just not enough Bitcoin to go around. It's not like if it was gold and the gold ETFs got approved 20 plus years ago. And so guess what they started to do? They realized there's demand and they started mining more gold. Bitcoin is different because you can't mine more of it. 900 Bitcoin come in a day. And if you look at this, I really like this. Bitcoin price history with halvings. 50 new Bitcoin per block were coming out right here. And guess what? Price goes up. Then 25, price goes up. 12.5, price goes up. And we are at 6.25 new Bitcoin per block right now. And that's 900 a day. And just like Pomp said, 14 in this tweet, 14 times more demand than the network produced in the same day were bought only by the ETFs, not by everyone, not by Michael Saylor, who's also buying with MicroStrategy, not by dudes like you and me that are just like buying fractions of a Bitcoin. This is the land grab. And guess what? The beauty of this whole thing is that it's about to be cut in half from 900 a day, which is right now, to 450. And so, like, if you can educate yourself and see this, it's just clear that according to supply and demand, it's going to skyrocket. And we can tell people around us that we really love, hey, it's time to get in now. And they can say, I'm close to retirement, so that's probably dumb, because they don't know.
Yeah.
And if you would take a little bit of time and be like, no, you don't understand. This is like the most finite supply, the gold 5.0, whatever you want to call it. And it's about to skyrocket. It's not like times before. This thing is about to go off. And I think it's going to do something that we just have no idea. Like, it's going to be obvious to everyone in 2 years, but then it'll be like, hey, I was trying to tell you in 23 and 24, but that's when people will be like, oh, you're lucky you got in. Like, of course I should have got in, but I didn't. It's about to be crazy.
I have, and I'll just a couple of thoughts. One is, again, my mind goes to, imagine that there was a state or a country. It was 21 million acres, and large corporations started to come in and buy large blocks of that, and in the middle of it, you're saying, I have 1 acre.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that there's going to be, at some point, there's going to be the scarcity mindset that kicks in, and you're going to run out. There's not going to be, as you said, more that's being made available.
Yeah.
Interesting. If you go back to, what Satoshi Nakamoto's mindset might have been at the time, right, when we first were introduced to Bitcoin, I think there were two things he was probably thinking. One is Bitcoin can be an asset, but also Bitcoin could be used as currency.
Mm-hmm.
However, that assumes a couple of things, but most importantly, it assumes that Bitcoin was the only utility that could have been used. But in today's market, we have Tether, we have other ways, right, methods for currency,
which we didn't.
So
when
therefore,
yeah, you're exactly right.
When he started it,
right.
So therefore, now it's become much more of an asset.
Yeah.
Because there really isn't a need for it to be a currency.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right.
And so what I imagine the potential is, it will continue. Its value as an asset will grow. Its value as a currency will decrease. We'll see less move. We'll see people maybe not paying with Bitcoin because it's not necessary. And maybe there's greater desire to retain it as an asset. And then you'll see it come to a stop.
Yeah. Man.
That's my concern. Or not a concern, but that's what my thought is, right? I could pay, I think in one of our earlier episodes, I owed you some money.
Right.
I paid you for using, I think at the time, I paid you using Solana. Or something, right?
Yeah.
But I use, right. There are other ways and other cryptocurrencies that can be used for transaction, right? For payment. And for living day to day, you don't need to use Bitcoin.
And I think I remember us saying that you could send me Bitcoin, and you kind of laughed. I'm like, yeah, why would I do that? Because you want to retain that.
Right.
Now there are things. Excuse me. There are things like Lightning Network that is on rails of Bitcoin, and it works. It works in different places, and I've seen it. And I've used it a little bit, and it can work, but I think you're right. There's so many other options, stablecoins, Solana, Matic. I mean, that it's kind of like, well, we could use all these things. And some people are just like Bitcoin maxis and will say, no, only Bitcoin. All these other things are just fiat, FUD, and all of that stuff. But I think you're right. I think in the ecosystem, there's a lot of room for a lot of these different utilities to function, but Bitcoin is the ultimate. Hey, like you said, why would I send you my Bitcoin? That's like my savings for myself and my kids, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder, and I want to hit you with this question, and then we can talk about anything else. But let's give ourselves 2 years. So according to traditional Bitcoin cycles, we're at the beginning of a bull run, and it's going to run through the end. Traditionally, in a historical viewpoint, it'll run till the end of 25 or beginning of 26. And then traditionally, the bull market would turn bearish and would crash and lose 70 to 80%. Right. So let's say that in the next 2 years, you have the opportunity to flip. Let's just use a whole Bitcoin. Let's say everybody has a whole Bitcoin now. Not a lot of people do, but let's say, or you have a half a Bitcoin or whatever. But let's theoretically say you're listening or watching the podcast and you're like, okay, you have a whole Bitcoin. Would you flip that at a certain price for, and looking at it as an asset to trade for something else in your life that you might need or want or desire? Is there a price that you would flip your Bitcoin?
No. Again, because of the way that I'm looking at it, I look at it as an asset that I could hold on to, which I can borrow against to buy more assets. The minute I trade that 1 acre of land away, and that finite land, I think you used the example, right? Sold it for 100, and then see 100,000, and then it's at 120. 6 months later, and I'm thinking, I could really use that again. Well, I haven't benefited. I've actually, in my mind, made a terrible decision. I should have just held on to it. All right. So, there's in fact, I would. My goal is to continue to accumulate. Accumulate. I think on my LinkedIn, I made a post about something. If you are at 1, keep pushing forward. Right? If you're at 1 Bitcoin, keep pushing. So you see a lot of posts where people are saying just get to 1. For those who've gotten to 1, get to 2 now. Right? What's your next goal? Get to 2. You already hit your first level. Now try to get to 2. Right? If you're at 2, try to get to 5. All right. What is the next one? Just keep giving yourself another goal and accumulate. Right. And I think that's what I would tell people.
I think it's great. I have had a conversation with some family members that have told me at some point, it's not just about saving or getting more Bitcoin, but maybe about making your life better for you or your family. And I think it depends on the time period, and maybe like I don't own a home, but if let's say in a year, let's say Bitcoin it's just gone parabolic, like I think it might. Let's say it's at $250,000 in a year, which is crazy, right? That'd be like a 5x from here. And if I had a whole Bitcoin, I think at that point, if you could put 250,000, let's say, like I said, at the beginning of this podcast, there's a house in an area of Montana that I would like to live someday. It's $500,000, but like, let's say a house that I'm looking at that I would really enjoy and I think could be like a family home for my family someday and my kids' family. And let's say it's $800,000. If I could put $250,000 down on a house like that, at that point, you're kind of like, it's that land grab, but it's a land grab in a place that I really want to be. Like maybe when I'm like 60 years old and I just want to live there. Like at that point, maybe I'm not selling at 250, but if it was like all of a sudden 350 or 400,000, I'd have to really think about it.
Yeah. Can I suggest maybe an alternative to that?
Tell me.
All right. Say you're in the same situation and you have enough Bitcoin to let's assume for a second, you have enough Bitcoin if you were to cash out, you could buy the property.
Sure.
Right. Let's just assume that for a second.
Sure.
There's an alternative where you go and you say, I'm going to borrow against my Bitcoin. What I need to put down an appropriate down payment. But I look for a property that's maybe a 2-family. Maybe I look for a property that I could then purchase. I could rent out portions of it, which pays itself off, which pays back the loan on my Bitcoin. And now I have the property. It's paying for itself. I still have my Bitcoin. And then I kind of have best of both worlds, right?
Sure.
I haven't lost my Bitcoin And that's where I look at it and I say, well, maybe there's an opportunity that I would buy, a small property that has 4 apartments, 4 2 bedrooms,
Sure.
right? And I could rent out 3 of them, and I could live in one,
Yeah.
and allow it to pay it off, and then I could buy. Having done that, I could do that several times if I want, and continue to grow it, right? And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Are there opportunities for me to buy 10 acres of land somewhere
Yeah.
without buying it completely all out and then subdividing it and building property, homes on it, and then selling those off, and then I could retain a couple of acres for myself. I'm thinking, maybe those are some of the options that come available, and so that I never have to give my Bitcoin. I think
ideally, I think you're right. That kind of thing is not available as of yet, but
Correct.
that I
You
know
just have to
of,
hold
and
it.
it may be, but probably as Bitcoin retains more of the market share and becomes more recognizable, I think especially when it hits 6 figures, people will be like, oh, okay. And so right now it's $1 trillion asset. When it hits $2 trillion asset, and I do think like BlackRock, which would have like the 3rd largest, BlackRock itself would be like the 3rd largest economy in the world, if it was a country. And the fact that they're like sucking up all of the Bitcoin, like they make the rules. And so at some point over the next year or two, there will be loans that are Bitcoin backed loans. It's like, hey, yeah, if you put up for collateral this, whatever, half a Bitcoin or a full Bitcoin, then we'll give you this loan, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're exactly right. If you can retain it and then leverage it, I think you'll be set. But it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years how that falls out.
Yeah, I think that there are companies out there who are already doing that. And I think they're early on. I think it's too early to get involved or jump into that space right now. If you're thinking about it, I think you need to really just hold on for a little while. But there are companies out there who loan against physical gold, right? You go in, you say, I have $10,000 in gold, right? And use that as collateral. And then they give you a loan against it. They exist. I mean, that is their business model.
Yeah.
If we are talking about Bitcoin being digital gold, I don't see how this does not become, or how this doesn't happen. I think in 3 years we're having this discussion.
Yeah,
for sure. Within 3 years, I think we're having this discussion.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that. That's part of my gamble here, but it's not a crazy gamble.
Yeah.
You buy your Bitcoin, sit on it for 3 years.
Yeah.
Put it under the rock. You don't have to look at it, right? Bury it in your backyard. Yeah. Don't think about it for 3 years.
No, I think you're right.
Live in a way where it's one of those things that's sitting like a part of your investment, like retirement plan.
Yeah.
And then walk away.
Yeah.
Right. See what grows under that tree.
Hey, I think we're about done. I had a newbie question from one of our listeners, which was pretty cool. They were confused about really the market and how much Bitcoin they still have. So one of our listeners asked me, said, hey, I bought Bitcoin at 50, I think they said $54,000 of Bitcoin, and they bought just a fraction, whatever. I think they bought like $2,500 worth. And they asked me this when it was sitting at 40. And so they said, okay, and they were thinking about moving it and doing something else with it. They wanted to retain it. But if they sold it, they said, I would lose that amount of Bitcoin because it's not worth what I bought it. And they wanted to know, is that true? Do I have less Bitcoin? If I sell it now, do I have less Bitcoin as when I bought it? And I thought that's a good question that we could talk about. So do you know what I'm trying to say? Do they have less Bitcoin if they sell it for less?
If I bought,
Mm-hmm.
and let's go back to the acre of land
Mm-hmm.
question.
Yeah.
I buy an acre of land for $50,000.
Right.
I sit on it for 4 years, and the price of that land has come down to $30,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I sell that acre of land.
Mm-hmm.
I still have an acre of land.
Mm.
It's just the value, right?
Yeah.
What the market has come down. So I sell it. It's $30,000 now.
Right.
Right. I mean, in effect, I've lost $20,000.
Yeah. But you still have the same amount of land.
But
or
I
you're
still have
selling the same
amount
amount
of
of land. So let's say you don't sell it
right.
and it shoots up in value
Right.
to $65,000 for that acre of land. Have you gained more land?
Yes.
Well, you haven't gained
No.
more land. It stays.
It's no. I still have 1 acre of land.
Right. And I think it
Right.
goes
Think
to that
about-
thought of once you
Yeah.
like 1 Bitcoin is worth 1 Bitcoin. If you've heard that before.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, think about it. If the amount of Bitcoin you had fluctuated up and down as the price is going, think of the scarcity discussion we just had.
Sure.
There's only 21 million Bitcoin,
Right.
right? And just because that's gone up, it doesn't mean you have more Bitcoin. Like, I would love it because I would say, oh my gosh, I have, more Bitcoin. No, I have exactly what I had.
Right.
All right. Except my 1 Bitcoin goes a lot further than it did a little while ago.
There you go. That's good. Remember, 1 Bitcoin is worth 1 Bitcoin, and the US dollar might fluctuate up and down, but your Bitcoin stays the same.
Correct. You will always have 1 Bitcoin.
Good.
Well, not always until you buy
Unless
more.
you sell it.
Yeah.
Or buy it.
Unless you sell it. Well, if you sell it, Andrew and I are here waiting for
We'll
you.
buy it for you.
We will be more than happy to buy it. Thank
Yes.
you.
Man, this has been
Anyway,
a good
Andrew,
conversation.
Great show today.
Love it.
Yeah,
we'll
love
see
it.
you again. See you. Bye.
You are listening to Hard Knock Crypto. New episodes drop every Friday.